Ну, то есть вот так вот, как ты.
А если отойти? Или тогда тебя не слышно? У нас вообще сейчас вот этот микрофон.
Ну, только я могу, если сяду на твое место, тогда мне будет видно.
Ну, я буду там сидеть.
Ну, хорошо. Я тогда буду так вот.
Но если будет выбивать, вы просто
А
прибегать.
что, не хотят просто меня видеть?
Да, потому что когда только твой голос, тогда странно.
Да какая разница, у них все равно такой голос переводчика.
Нет, ну люди в Могилеве тебя слышат.
Ага.
Они слышат тебя сразу.
Ну ладно. Ну, слышит и слышит. Это уже неплохо.
Можно еще что-то было подставить, конечно. Но сделать выше. Но это стрёмно и, наверное, не стоит.
Не, ну можно, конечно, попробовать на...
Ты можешь смотреть, у тебя просто будет камера здесь, отойти, и просто там, где тебя видно, можешь говорить.
Да недалеко я это могу отойти.
Вот, тебя уже видно.
Но все равно я стою спиной.
Это когда ты уже подходишь, просто подвести какие-то результаты сюда. Когда ты только вот не работаешь ты как ты хочешь, просто когда у тебя нужна какую-то обратную связь передавать, тогда ты подходишь и просто сюда говоришь с большого расстояния. Так, мы тут немножко меняем настройки для видео, чтобы Олесю было лучше видно, когда она результаты групповой работы представляет. Так, наверное, будет лучше. Меня должно быть и хорошо слышно, и хорошо видно, правильно?
Да, Аня, вот так, в принципе, нормально. Хотя бы чуть-чуть, чтобы Олесю было видно.
Участников видно при этом?
Да. Ну вот когда ты так стоишь, участников не видно, но это, в принципе, и не важно, когда Олеся будет что-то говорить модератору, а то ее не видно.
Ну, то есть, если Олеся...
Ну, все. Хорошо, тогда я буду вот так говорить.
Ну, как-нибудь, да.
Меня слышно. Я не могу чуть дальше отойти, потому что тут шнур еще как бы ограничен. Хорошо. Я не знаю.
Нормально так, не приседайте.
Хорошо, ладно, буду вот так говорить. Спиной к участникам.
Да. Ну, вот Таня что же самое делает.
Но это только когда говорить что-то будете с Сарой, это не всегда.
Юля, можешь зайти? Я в чат сбросила ссылку на трансляцию, что
зайду.
там происходит, что
Сейчас.
слышно, видно.
Ну, сейчас зайду. Слушай, скажи Олесе, чтобы начинала упражнение уже. Куда
Да, она вот как раз
делает?
начинает.
А, ясно, то я ее потеряла. Сейчас зайду, Ань.
Да,
Пошла начинать упражнение.
Да, тогда
не
пиши,
начинать.
Юля, пиши в Teams, что там как.
Ну, они уже начали.
Уважаемые участники, собирайтесь, пожалуйста, уже здесь. Коллеги.
продолжим после обеда. Я не буду вас заставлять двигаться, учитывая, что обед, приятное ощущение. Давайте представим, сейчас у нас маленький начальник, что мы сейчас такие цветочки, которые утром еще с наклоненной головой, еще листики такие, без солнышка. Вот просто сделаем вот так вот, сядем и опустим голову, опустим руку. Утро, солнышко, и оно начинает светить, и голова поднимается, плечики поднимаются, листики поднимаются, ручки поднимаются вверх, тянутся вверх к солнышку и начинают колоситься. Тут ручка приходит, и у нее начинает идти маленький дождь. И он идет, и вот так вот он легенький дождик по цветочку, по листикам, по стеблинкам.
Все, мы инокджайтер завершили.
Олеся, даже если вы вот так будете говорить, то
Хорошо.
тоже хорошо вас видно.
Хорошо, хорошо. Я буду так говорить. Все, мы завершили, так что мы готовы уже работать дальше.
I see everybody coming back, but I think the idea is now to go immediately into the lunch break and then meet at 2.
Ну, говори, что все. У нас периодически будет выключать. Всем еще раз добрый день. К сожалению, компьютер выключаться, тут неустойчивое интернет-соединение, но просто продолжаем, как оно есть.
Но я вообще не...
Только нету Сары.
Таня, хоть скажи хоть что-нибудь. Потому что мы вообще никого не слышим. Оно включен звук. Ты меня слышишь, Тань?
А что вы хотите слышать? Мы слышим вас,
Ну, не знаю,
Бравляна
может,
хорошо
хоть-
слышно.
А, вы... Хорошо. А то было вообще непонятно, слышит нас.
Так, кто еще командировки не забрал? Можно вопрос? Спасибо. Да. Да нет. А где?
Марин, ты Марину разобрал. Вот, да.
Не
Sarah,
понял.
hello. Could you hear us?
Среди ланч.
Я склонил.
Не поняла. Мгм.
Sarah, could you hear us? Аня пошла.
Она такая, ну, так уже.
Теперь нет тренера.
Так у нас уже 2 часа. Ну,
Ну, ждем. Ну, вот она.
ладно.
Главное, что переводчик.
Все, боровляны готовы. Ну, я знаю.
Что, правда? Минск?
И Могилев уже готов.
So, hello everyone. Can you hear me?
Мгм.
Is the sound okay again? Yeah. So,
Да, все слышно. Переводчика слышно.
thank you. Great. Okay, let me just start my devices here because I have many different devices. Just a moment. And we need to go back. So, okay, so welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good lunch first, and also that you had a nice energizer, sorry. And I hope you're all fully energized and ready to continue the training again. Did any questions or remarks or comments come up during the break that you want to share here with me?
Нету пока никаких комментариев, боровляны.
Могилев, вопросов тоже пока не возникало.
Okay.
Кроме того, чтобы
Good.
понимать дальнейший ход нашего мероприятия.
Okay, I will explain. Yes, thank you. So what we are going to do now is actually what I was planning to do already before the lunch break. We are continuing a little bit more about a little bit of theory about child sexual abuse. So about different forms, about characteristics of victims and also of perpetrators, risk factors. This is not so much theory anymore, but I will go through the slides and then we will end with a quiz about that. And then depending on the time, we will have a break or we will move on with the next part. After the break will be already the last part of today. After the break, we will do the sharing round. So this is something you will do on your own in small groups where everybody can, who has any experience with working with children who have been victim of abuse, where they can share those experiences and where you can discuss these in the group. There will be some questions also involved. You will hear about this later. But this is what we will do today. If we have some time left, we will also do the third part of today that I had in mind about the workshops for children. But if we don't have enough time, then we will skip that part. I don't think it's a big problem because all that information that I'm going to give you then is also in the workbook. So if we skip the part, I don't think it matters. You can read it yourself and you have the exercises. And of course, if there's something that is not clear or that you want to discuss, you can then come back next week and ask me. And we can make some time then to discuss that. So this is what we will do next. So I will just now continue with the presentation. Can you still see my screen actually? Because on the video.
Боровляна видит.
Okay.
Могилев тоже видит, спасибо.
Okay, so you can see the slide now about with the hands, huh? Hands on, hands off abuse. Okay. Okay, great. So okay, next part. So what we just did was you already did an exercise about different forms of child sexual abuse, and you didn't have any problems with thinking of cases. Case stories that fit different types of abuse. So that means actually you already know a lot about these different types. I will just go briefly through them now. So, you know, you can make many different categorizations about child sexual abuse. One of the ways you can categorize different types, different forms, is to look at the type of behavior. So one distinction that is often made is called hands-on versus hands-off abuse. Hands-on means with using hands, so abuse that involves touching, physical touch. Hands-off means abuse that does not involve any touching, non-touching forms. We have already briefly discussed these. Some examples of non-touching, hands-off abuse are showing pornography to a child, exhibitionism, child pornography on the internet, and of course, hands-on abuse is what we, you know, is the real life abuse, which can involve rape, touching of genitals, touching of body parts, these kind of things. Also, kissing can be, you know, if it happens involuntarily, it can also be considered as a form of child sexual abuse. So this is a distinction that we can make. It is important to realize that in reality, there is often an overlap between these two forms. And another thing that is important to keep in mind, people very often think that hands-off abuse without touching that the impact is not so harmful. For example, I know that in several Asian countries in the world, especially in the Philippines at the moment, there is this thing going on. It's called live streaming of sexual abuse. It basically means that a child is put in front of a camera, a webcam, and that people, usually in Western countries, log in and they pay, and then the child performs sexual acts in front of the camera, and the people pay to see it. It's a sort of a very new way of abusing a child from a distance. It's happening a lot in poor families who make money in this way. And what often happens, they did research in the Philippines among parents of these children. Parents are often involved themselves in these type of abuse, in arranging and organizing it, and they collect the money as well. It seems, of course, very strange that this happens, but the idea for the parents often was shown in the research, that since the children are not being touched, it cannot harm them. That was the idea. So here you see also, again, the importance of awareness raising, because even though a child is not being touched, the fact that it needs to perform sexual acts, sexual movements of any kind, but also the fact that the child may also watch other people online reacting to that, adults, and also the fact that there can be recordings of this form of abuse that can be spread over the internet. All these factors are super harmful for a child, or potentially harmful. So yeah, this is one quite extreme example of how hands-off abuse, where there's no touching involved, can still be have a huge impact on a child, and it's important to recognize that. And also, because this is maybe a little bit an extreme example, but also the you know, if something happens that is less severe, like for example, a girl making a sexual image of herself, a sexy image, and then share it with a boyfriend, and he puts it online. This can look maybe even almost innocent to us adults, but the impact of this can be very big for a girl, because she can be bullied in school. She can be very ashamed of herself. She can you know, fear that her parents will find out of, or she may in the future experience the consequences when this material keeps circulating online. So please keep in mind, hands-off abuse can be just as harmful and can have just as big of an impact. So yeah, this is not the same categorization. Another way to categorize is between online and offline abuse. Of course, online is usually also hands-off abuse, and offline abuse is hands-on, real-life abuse. What is important to say about this further is that it happens, online abuse happens very much. UNICEF says, they did a very large poll in 33 countries. 1 in 3 young people, so people under 18, experience online bullying. Bullying does not necessarily involve a sexual part, but it often does, online bullying. So that this is happening to 1 in 3 young persons. And then another research from Plan International says that 58% of girls between 15 and 25, so a little bit older age, experienced online sexual harassment. So it's almost 60%, almost 2 in 3 girls. So that's very many. And then another thing that's also a very alarming number is there is, as I told you before, I used to work at a hotline in the Netherlands to report child sexual abuse on the internet. But there are these type of hotlines throughout the world. There is a very big one in the United States. And last year they received 21.4 million reports about online child sexual abuse materials, so images or videos. Not all of this material is really eventually turns out to be child sexual abuse, but still it gives you an indication that the numbers for these kind of crimes are super high. Okay, so I'm going to skip this because later on we will talk more about online abuse. So another way of categorizing forms of child sexual abuse is to focus on the type of perpetrator. So it's when you want to understand child sexual abuse, it's important to know who is abusing these children. Who are these people? Well, roughly we can divide these child abusers in three categories. One is the first one, we call it situational offenders. This is the biggest group of offenders. And that's important to keep in mind because for this group, it's the circumstances that are actually the trigger for offending. So rather than their sexual orientation, this means that a person who may not have a specific sexual orientation focused on children, so not a sexual preference for children, may still be able to offend and to molest a child. An example of this can be, for example, a father of a daughter, and what often happens is these, the parents are married, then the mother dies, and then out of grief and stress, the father eventually turns to his daughter and sexually abuses her. This is what you call situational abuse. It's not like the father has a sexual preference for children, but due to the circumstances, it happens. This is by no means a justification, of course. So the behavior is still as wrong and should be treated like that. But it's good to understand that it's not the same as being a pedophile and having a sexual preference. Another important example is, as we all know, a lot of sexual abuse happened in the Catholic Church. This is not because there are many pedophiles among pastors or priests. It is because there was opportunity for these people. So in combination with the fact that they were required to be celibate, and then the opportunity to spend time with children alone, which many members of the Catholic Church had in the past times because they were teaching children or they were taking care of children. That combination made that a lot of abuse could happen there. So this is also an example of situational abuse. So, and yeah, other reasons that situational abusers may abuse a child can involve a lack of good relationships with other adults. So they feel a lack of connection with other people, and therefore they turn to children to fulfill their emotional needs in first instance. And this eventually may lead to also sexual relationships or trying to fulfill their sexual needs with children. And other reasons can be hypersexuality, so people addicted to sex more than that they have a specific sexual preference for children, and then children are just an easy victim basically for them. An easy way to fill their needs for their addiction. Yeah, these are some examples of situational offense. So then the other one, the other type of abusers, this is what we call preferential offenders. And this group involves people who have a specific sexual attraction to children. So part of this group, this is what we call pedophiles. A pedophile is someone who feels attracted to children who have not reached puberty. The word pedophile is something we often use when we talk about child sex offenders, also in the media and everywhere you hear it. But it's actually not the right term. It refers to someone who has a sexual preference for children who has not reached puberty, but it does not say anything about someone's behavior, because there are, and this is something many people don't know or even want to believe, but there are many pedophiles who do feel attracted to children, but do never practice any form of sexual abuse in their entire life. So the fact that someone has a preference does not say that they will eventually offend. On the other hand, the fact that someone does not have a preference for children, sexual preference, that does not mean that they will never abuse a child, as we have just seen with the situational abusers. So it's important to understand these distinctions. And overall, you can say that the group of preferential offenders is a smaller group than the situational offender. So less of the cases of child sexual abuse involve people with a real preference for children. So that's interesting. You see also here in the text boxes, I put these words: pedophile, monster, sexual predator. I think the use of these terms when you discuss the topic of child sexual abuse in general, it's not helpful. The goal for all of us, I think, working on these topics is to try whatever we can do to recognize abuse and respond, and even more important, to prevent abuse. And the first step in prevention is to start an open dialogue about this topic, to create a climate in which people can talk about these things. Because if you don't have that, there is no way you can ever detect any form of child sexual abuse. So I don't think it helps if you use all these very negative words to describe child sexual abuse, even though it's of course very very difficult subject. It eventually it's better if also people who have this preference for children, if they have the feeling that they can go somewhere for help, for example. As I told you before, I used to work in the organization, in the hotline, but we also had a helpline. There was an anonymous helpline for people with a sexual preference for children. They could call us anonymously and get counseling support, etc. I think this was a very interesting to talk to these people, because in fact I did speak to many who said that they would never abuse a child, but they had a very difficult life, because if it's something that you can never share with your friends or family. So they were often very isolated, very lonely, and depressed, having thoughts of suicide, those kind of things. You heard that very much. But also, and I thought that was very important, once these people are under stress, the chance that they will abuse a child is much higher. So if we want to prevent child sexual abuse, people with these sexual preferences need our help as well, to avoid them to get into the situation that they are alone with a child and that they cannot control themselves. So I think with prevention in the back of our head, we need to gain this type of understanding. Let me see. yeah, so also the name of the project that you are participating in is Break the Silence. I think that refers to breaking the silence among victims to talk about sexual abuse. I would say that's, in general, we should break the silence and the taboos around speaking about sexual abuse and create a open dialogue. And then the third group who abuses children, the third group of offenders are actually children themselves. Estimates are that a third of all child sexual abuse happens between children and is usually perpetrated by another child, and then normally or not always, of course, but it's often a slightly older child. And an important factor here is that very often these children are not aware of what they are doing, or the fact that that's not, that it's wrong to abuse another child. So here again, awareness raising is important. Let me see if I forget something to say about this. Yeah. Yeah, so in general, the last comment is also important. You could never pick an abuser from a crowd. It's not like you can recognize. We sometimes have this idea of an older man who looks creepy, or it's not like that. Perpetrators can come from all classes, all religions, all ethnicities, all ages. So yeah, always keep that in mind. It's not something you can see from the outside. So let's move on to the next slide. So there's also, we can also make the other distinction that's between a known perpetrator and an unknown perpetrator. This means that the child who is abused may know the perpetrator in real life, or this is a stranger to the child, so they do not know them. And here I mentioned it already before. This is a very important fact. 9 out of 10 children that reported child sexual abuse said that they actually knew their abuser already. So this can be, if you talk about a known abuser, it can be a family member or a relative, but it can also be a neighbor or a friend of the family, or a friend in school, a teacher, anyone who a child knows. But as you can see, it's very often not a stranger outside in the woods or a stranger online. That cases that happen are the number of cases in which that happens is much lower. Well, and then there's of course there is incest or intrafamilial abuse, so abuse within the family. This is also a part of, when the perpetrator is known to the child, and this accounts for more or less 1/3 of the child sexual abuses, is what they estimate. I don't know if, as I said before, all these numbers are only estimates. We don't really know how often it happens, but it gives you an idea that if you talk about child sexual abuse, then it's often something that happens in the environment close to the child. Yeah, so this also, I show this because it's important not to focus on what they call the stranger danger. So we can, if we teach children about sexual abuse, we can teach them to be careful when they go out at night and these kind of things. And of course, all those things are important. But it may be even more important to teach a child that also if someone that they know touches them or does something to them or tells something to them that they don't feel good about, that it makes them feel uncomfortable, that they should share that with you. This may be more important than warning them from to watch out at night on the street, or to be safe online, for example, when they meet strange people. Okay. Then there's also the distinction between a male and a female perpetrator. By far the most of the abuse happens, when with a male perpetrator. So female perpetrators are rare, but they exist. And then there has been done some research on female perpetrators. Of course, it's very limited because there are not many female perpetrators, and when they are there, it's hard to find them, of course. But what they know is that it's a very mixed group. So some of them actually have a sexual preference for children, so they can be considered female pedophiles. But there is also a big group of female abusers that is actually abusing a child because they are either forced by a man to do it, or they are accompanying a man in the abuse voluntarily. And the last thing, what I said, accompanying a man in abuse, that's what you often see in the commercial sexual exploitation and prostitution that involves minors. So that can happen that an older woman, for example, exploits together with a man younger girls for financial gain. So prostitution, financially driven. In general, you see that the victims of female abusers are usually very young, and they can be both boy and girl. Some examples of female offending are also in the Catholic Church. We know that it was not only male priests, but also nuns who have abused and also physically abused, not only sexually, but also violent abuse. Girls this of course happened years ago already, but this is something we know. So there were also female nuns involved. But what you more often hear or read about, maybe in a newspaper, is cases of where, for example, an adult teacher is having a relationship with a younger pupil, a younger student who may be underage. And if the boy is underage, then this actually also considers child sexual abuse. In general, you see that gender differences also lead to different reactions from the environment. So if there, in general, people who sexually abuse a child are judged very hard by society. This is, of course, also the same for male and female, but it's even stronger when it concerns female offenders. It's more of a taboo that female offending exists. So it's also something that's good to talk about, because also for children may think that it isn't, if children think that only men abuse children, they may not recognize it when a woman abuses them. So it's also good to discuss with children that it can also be a woman who does something to you that you don't like, and that is actually the same as when a man does it. And in general, it's also, of course, good to keep in mind that there might be a lot more female abuse, but it might be more hidden, because we consider it normal that a woman hugs a child or touches a child or takes care of younger children, for example, changing diapers or all these kind of things. Also in professional life, we find it very normal. So we would not look at that. We would be less alert when it concerns women. than when it would concern a man. So, okay. Let's move on to the next slide. So here, this slide is about risk factors. So which children, for now we looked at the perpetrators, but another way to categorize different forms and types of child sexual abuse is to look at the type of victim, in this case, children. So if we look at which children are most at risk to become a victim of child sexual abuse, then, well, there's a long list. Children separated from families due to any kind of circumstances. It can be a war or a natural disaster or any other kind of circumstances. But in general, there is children who are not living with their biological parents are much more at risk to be abused. This also includes, of course, children in institutions, orphanages, and foster care, and adopted children as well. Also children in humanitarian emergencies, whether they are with the parents or not. In general, in these circumstances, the risk to be abused is higher. Also, children with physical disabilities or mental disabilities are more at risk. Yeah, maybe, I don't know if in both groups are people who work with children with mental or physical disabilities, but this is also because they are more dependent on others also for their need to for being taken care of, and this is also a group that is much more difficult to reach, needs a very different approach when you do awareness raising, of course. In general, also children belonging to a lower economic status, so poor children, are more at risk. Girls more than boys, we said that already. Girls, from the time that their menstruation starts, from that time they are also more at risk than before. So children in the beginning of puberty or girls beginning of puberty are most at risk. Children belong to the LGBT community are also more at risk. You can also see that online they receive much more negative attention online on social media, including sexual attention and sexual comments and online sexual abuse. Let me see. Well, the absence of biological parent, mentioned that already, but also when there are marital conflicts or when one or both parents use alcohol or drugs, these type of things also make the risk of sexual abuse within the family much higher. And actually also the chance that children experience abuse outside of the family, because the parents are the first ones normally to recognize the abuse. So if the parents are absent or due to addiction or anything else, not fully present, then that increases chances of abuse for the children and makes them more vulnerable. And also when children using alcohol or drugs themselves, of course. And then the last one is also an important one: children with a history of abuse, and that can be sexual abuse, but also physical abuse or neglect. These children also have a higher chance to be re-victimized, so to experience abuse in any form again, including sexual abuse. So if you work with children who are separated from their families, who have any disability, if you work in an institution, if you work with children who have already experienced some form of abuse, these are all things to be extra alert towards these children, because they have a higher chance to be experiencing abuse. And for those of you working in the child protection system, in the child welfare system, it was an interesting research in the US among child trafficking victims, so children who are exploited in the sexual business, basically. And more than 60% of these children had a history in the child welfare system. So they were mostly from broken homes. And so that shows also the higher chance for these children to experience this. Okay, let me see how far we are. Only a few more slides. One more thing about victims. It's also, I think this is already clear now. Child sexual abuse is gendered. So that means gender plays a role when you talk about sexual abuse. Girls experience more abuse than boys. They are 2 to 3 times more likely than boys to become a victim. On the other hand, more than 90%, even 95% of the perpetrators is male. So that's also a very clear gendered part of it. And also, when you look at child abuse material on the internet, child pornography on the internet, also the large majority of what you see there is involves girls and not so many boys. This does not mean that boys cannot experience abuse, because of course this also happens, and it might be also more hidden because boys are less likely to report and talk about it. So it's also still very important to focus on boys during workshops and during awareness raising. And also in some settings, boys are more likely to be abused. For example, in an institution where there are only boys, of course, then they are the ones more at risk there. If you see, if you look at the place of where abuse can happen, in general, you can say it can happen everywhere, anywhere in the world, in all kinds of settings. But where it happens most is at the home of the child or at the home of the perpetrator. This may sound very logical to you, but it's good to keep that in mind, that sexual abuse, you would not, if you work at a school or an institution or a sports facility, or it's not very likely that you would there run into a situation of abuse. This normally happens in a home where people have privacy. But it can also, of course, happen in these other places like school, church, institution, but mostly in the homes. It can happen in all types of contexts, poor, wealthy. In every country in the world, there are reports of child sexual abuse. And in general, it happens in settings where there is unregulated and unsupervised access to children for the perpetrators. So settings where there is a higher risk are residential care settings, institutions, educational facilities, especially for younger children, where there are younger children who need more physical care. For example, they need help when they go to the toilet. You know, these are the type of places where abuse also can happen easily and where nobody sees it. Faith-based and settings where there is close contact, one-on-one contact with children, community youth services, sports, these kind of settings. And then some other facts. The US study I was talking about, it also said that children in foster care are 4 times more likely to experience abuse, and 60% of the child trafficking victims had a history in the child welfare system. That's what I just said. Also, physical force or physical violence is rarely used during child sexual abuse. So that's what we often think, that children are physically forced. In reality, that's often not necessary, even because if an adult has a position of authority, children are tend to respond and obey to what the adult asks them. And it's more often that a perpetrator uses manipulation and threats rather than physical force. And this also means that there are not so many signs involved. If there is physical force, there might be bruises or other signs, physical signs that something happened. But if that's not there, and if there's a child is manipulated, then there are no visible signs. And also good to know is that child sexual abuse are often not one-time incidents, but they usually occur over weeks or even years, especially when it happens in the family. It can continue for years. So this is the last slide of this part, in case you were getting tired. The last thing I would like to mention, I think it's important also to understand that by stopping abuse, you do not only stop one child from being abused, you do actually so much more, because you may save the whole future of this one child. You may prevent other children from being abused by the same perpetrator. But also, abuse may lead to a child who is growing up and also starts to abuse himself or herself. So the fact that a child is abused can actually lead to abuse in the future again. This is what we call intergenerational transmission. They estimate that a third, 30% of those who have suffered physical or sexual abuse as a child will subject their own children to some form of abuse in the future. So this is a high number. 1 in 3 abused children may abuse their own children or other children when they grow up. Not necessarily sexually, can also be physical abuse or neglect of their children. But these things also have very heavy impact. So this is also good to keep in mind. And then, protective factors are so factors that prevent children or that make it less likely that children become a perpetrator when they grow up. Is the love and support of one parent, a loving, supportive relationship as an adult, fewer stressful events in life, and acknowledgement of the childhood abuse, and determination not to repeat it. So these things are important if someone is abused. If a child is abused, if these protective factors are fulfilled, chances are less that he will also continue to abuse in the future. So this is also important to keep in mind if you work with children who have experienced abuse. The way you respond to that, the way they are supported afterwards, and they are how is responded to the abuse can make a big difference in the rest of their lives, also for the next generation. So now, this was the theory part. There is also a quiz. So I would like to ask the facilitators to now continue with the quiz. And then let's say try to be back here. I think you can take about 20 minutes for the quiz. And then after that, directly you guys can have a coffee break already. I think that's the easiest way to go, and then we pick it up from there. So let's say we will meet again at let me see the time, sorry. So it's 3. Yeah, well, just let's meet again in half an hour. Shall we say that? 3:20. And that you already had your break then? Is that okay? Just raise a hand or thumbs up if that's okay. Okay. Okay, I see some messages, but I cannot read them. So I just assume that it's okay. Go do the quiz, have a break afterwards, and we will see each other here in half an hour. If you need more time, group facilitators, let me know.
Спасибо, все понятно. Мы работаем.
По времени викторины, или просто видео будет идти?
Нет, будет мы поставим. Поставим.
Тогда надо отключить звук.
Отключить?
Ну, да, зачем?
Ну, давай отключим. Всё, мы вернулись. Боровляне вернулись. Мы уже практически все вернулись, боровляны. Еще надо посмотреть, смотря по картинке в Могилеве, у них еще не все вернулись.
I forgot to put on this. Sorry. Hi, everyone.
Алло, алло. Мы начинаем уже работу обмена опытом? Правильно понимаю? Или мы ждем
Yes, I
Сару?
will briefly introduce that first before you will start doing that. Okay. So if everybody is back at their seats, I will start with a short introduction before we get into the sharing round. Okay, please show your thumb.
Все в порядке, но мы слышим только двух переводчиков сразу, одновременно.
Okay. That's
Дмитрий,
one.
Олег, разберитесь, сейчас переводит.
Mogilov also okay? Okay, great. Okay, so I hope everybody can see the presentation again on Zoom. We will now move into the part of the day where we will share our experiences, your experiences. As I said in the beginning, I've been told that some of you who work with children have already worked with children that experienced abuse, that were victims of abuse. And some of you do not have that experience yet. Both is totally fine. It's for both of you. I think it's good to share with each other and learn from each other. It is also possible that at the beginning of this training, you thought I have no experience with the topic. And now that you hear more, you think of cases of things or accidents or situations that may have something to do with abuse. That's something that you have come to realize now. So that's also interesting to discuss. It can also happen that you have experience with the topic outside of work and that you have things about it that you want to share. So keep all these things in mind. Let me see. So before we start, I want to pay some attention to the following thing. Actually, that is the importance of a safe setting, a safe space, to create a safe setting before you start discussing personal experiences or professional experiences, actually, in this case, with child sexual abuse. As I have said also in the beginning of this day, only discussing this topic, even on a theoretical level, may trigger emotions or maybe memories or other reactions. And especially if we start talking about things you may have experienced in work, then and with children that you do know and that you maybe care about, then this may even trigger more emotions. So it's good to be aware of that, and it's very important that you find you feel comfortable in the space and with the people that you are discussing this with. And the same goes actually later on for the workshops that you will be giving to children. The intention of these workshops is not necessarily that they will share their personal experiences, but still talking about child abuse or sexuality in general is very sensitive also for children. So creating a safe space and, giving some time to set a safe setting, it's always very important and useful, and it will lead to better discussion, better workshop, better interaction, more trust. So it is in the end more effective and efficient for everyone in that way. Let me say, so I would like to give a few tips, advice for creating a safe space. This is something you can also see in your workbook. So if you want to use this as advice as well when you give the workshop to children, then please refer to your workbook. There is a whole piece of advice there which you can read, and yeah, I think which can be usable in a workshop or in any other setting, basically, if you want to discuss a sensitive issue. Well, the first thing that is important when you want to create a safe setting is to set ground rules. This may sound a little bit strict, but it's not intended like that. Ground rules are important for everyone to feel safe, because that they create a sense of clarity about where this space is for, and you know what the boundaries are, and that creates a feeling of safety for everyone and a clarity also. Here there is a short list of example ground rules that you could use right now when you start sharing the experiences. I'm not gonna, you can read them yourself later on, but they include respect, confidentiality, very important. Everything what's been said here today will stay here. You will not share this outside of this group with other colleagues or other people. This is something really important that everybody needs to be able to count on. Listening to each other, asking questions when you don't understand, and support after a sensitive topic if needed. Here, these 5 things, these are ground rules that you can set today. But before you start, please, group facilitators, check with the group if everybody feels comfortable with these rules, but also if there are rules that should be here that are not there, and then agree upon them together. Because ground rules, they don't mean